Welcome to the first episode of what I'm probably going to call a ranking of racers. And yes, I totally stole this idea from Jeff Gersman with his ranking of NES games, but damn it, it's a really good idea, and there are a lot of horrible and good racing games that the YouTube community really needs to know about and probably avoid or play. Hey, no king shaming here, you do what you want to do. But hey, okay, if you came here because of That Designer Guy, welcome. If not, I have another channel called That Designer Guy where I talk about people, history, and pretty much anything about design, in which I have a few videos about cars and a few about video games if you're interested. So link is below if you want to check them out. But you're here for the definitive list of racing games, and I know what you're all thinking. Why should I trust this asshole among all the other people who have done this for many years? And I'm not telling you you should, but I like to play racing games. I'm not a hardcore racing guy, I just like playing these games. They're fun. They can be mindless but challenging. Plus you get to drive cars you never get to, and if you have a friend or significant other, they're a great co-op game. I play all types too, from arcade style racers and kart racers to more sim and rally time attack games. I grew up playing Need for Speed on the PS1, and even before that, Rad Racer on the NES. Yeah, look that up. And I still love playing Outrun at the arcades when I can actually find it. So what I'll be doing is showing gameplay of the racers I tried out, put commentary and my thoughts about the game over it, and rank at least 4 games per episode. At the end of this, if there even is an end of this, we'll crown the best racer. Maybe I'll do a yearly thing? Best racer of 2025? We'll see. But without further ado, let's start with an actually pretty low bar, actually. So this is Moto Roader for the TurboGrafx 16, which is on actual hardware. Now, for some of you, the TurboGrafx is an alternate universe gaming system where the Fruit of the Loom logo had the cornucopia in it. So I'd forgive you if you had no idea what this game or console is, but Moto Roader was released in 1989 and is notable for having up to 5 players simultaneously, but for a console that by design only had one port for a controller. That's right, the developers NCS had the balls to think there would be 4 other people that would want to play this, and that the kid who owned the game would have a multi-tap adapter and 4 other controllers. The game comes with a story too, so get ready for this. It's the year 2015. Man, they're really gonna hate when 2020 rolls around. And it's a futuristic racer, but also, are you ready for this? Hunger, war, and crime have been erased from the face of the earth. Machines do all the work, computers do all the thinking. Peace reigns over the land, and yet the youth of this paradise on earth are bored until... First off, what rip-off Star Trek world are we living in here? Because I want in that only the game was as insane as this story. It's not. Let's talk about... Bare bones are 2 words I would use to describe this title, but also not enough to describe this title. Now, I'm biased because I hate top-down racers. I think the controls are confusing, I think this feel of speed is always non-existent, and the games just look flat, and this title is no exception. I will say the cars, the courses, the assets are all bright, somewhat detailed, and there is a bit of depth to the world. The countdown is probably the most exciting part, next to the slight parallax effects along with shadows trying their damnedest to show depth. And I've seen far worse games than this, but you can upgrade your car visually, but okay, so you'll see your body change in the gameplay, but see those wheels? You'll never see them in the game other than this menu right here. There's also almost no HUD except for the gas you have left on the bottom of the screen, and that's because the camera stays glued right in the center of the action. I mean, that was a choice? There is combat in this game with explosions, which I also find interesting because we're living in a f***ing utopia, but not in Moto Roader, apparently we're not. And this all brings me to the... Listen people, there's not much to say here. It's a top-down circuit racer with a counter that is constantly going down unless you refuel. And the rubber banding I spoke about is the vein of this game's existence. Not only does it steal more gas from you, it is way too aggressive. If you're behind and misjudge your turn, it'll just yank the crap out of you and not right yourself on the track. So like if you're facing left, it'll yank you facing that way, even if you have to go right. So 99% of the time, you're facing the wrong direction when it tries to bring you back onto the race. And the reason why the rubber banding is so crazy is because this is a context-sensitive style racer. So left isn't always left, or right isn't always right because it's based on the camera orientation on the track, which is so infuriating. You do get used to it, Kind of, but since the camera is so tight and the rubber banding is so aggressive, eventually you will forget what is left and what is right and just be dragged for the ride. There's also a few styles of gameplay. I only played another one until I gave up. The first one I played was just a race circuit, nothing big. The second had a sinkhole or an oil puddle. I had no idea what this is. At first I thought it was a sinkhole, but I didn't fall, and then I watched someone else play it and he called it mud. I have no idea, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter for this game. I can see the multiplayer being a big sell for this game because there's nothing else to it. It's short, it's unforgiving, it's insanely boring, but if you have 4 other friends, a few bourbons, then yeah, it might be somewhat fun. But come on, if you owned a TurboGrafx, did you really have 4 other controllers just for this game and the multi-tap? And I know, some kids had the same console. I knew a lot of people when I was in elementary school that had an NES and could bring another NES controller if they needed to, but how many people do you know that owned a TurboGrafx? So the only skill I feel you need for this game is to learn how to follow the camera and navigate the road. Also, just upgrade your engine, body, and tires and you'll be fine, because if you don't, you'll never pass 3rd place. This is a brain-dead arcade racer that I feel so sorry for anyone that got this on their birthday or Christmas, because I know, you were stuck with this game for at least a year. But at least you had the... No, you didn't. The sound effects and music are uninspiring. The music will just kind of disappear as you wrap the insanity of the controls in your mind, and the sound effects are just generic enough that it's not going to annoy you. So let's get to the... So the pros. 5 players seems like it could be fun, and that's pretty much it. What about the cons? The rubber banding is atrocious. The controls are confusing. Unless you held onto the manual, you'll never get a chance to preview the bodies, but it doesn't matter anyway because the top of the list is the slowest and the bottom of the list is the fastest, pretty much for everything. The sound effects just drone on, and the graphics are just mid to low tier here. I've played some top-down racers in my time, and I hated almost all of them. This carries that legacy full force. There's nothing special here, there's no real fun to be had, and while it seems to go for some coin on the resale market, I have no idea why, but whatever, it's not worth seeking out. And in terms of the list, I mean, it's number 1, so congratulations Moto Roader for being number 1 on the chart. You deserve it, you piece of sh. So hey, you know how I said like 3 minutes ago I hated top-down racers? Like, I have a dentist appointment in 2 weeks and I'm looking more forward to that than playing another top-down racer? So of course we're playing another top-down racer. Okay, it's more of an isometric racer. There's a difference. Maybe? Neo Drift Out New Technology, which is different than Neo Drift Out apparently, is a game that came out for the Neo Geo CD and actual arcades in 1996, which is a whole 7 years after Moto Roader. So this is a JDM-centric isometric rally time attack racer, which in this version, the Visco collection on Steam has likenesses, and by likenesses I mean they just changed the damn names, of the Evo, Impreza, and Celica vehicles to choose from. Apparently in the arcades they are these cars, but I'm assuming the developers and publishers of this collection, QU Byte, didn't want to pay the licensing again. But right off the back, the... are so amazing. I mean, legit, the detailed pixel graphics of this title are so cool. It's so late 90s, it's so Neo Geo. Like, there's something about the ultra detailed pixel designs of the cars, the stages, and the surrounding areas that scream arcade. And I'm just 100 for that. All the stages have different environmental obstacles and each stage feels different. It's not cosmetic. And the way the game zooms in and out as you speed up gives it a great sense of speed and urgency. It feels like a rally game, something which is very hard in games like this. The cars bounce as they go down the road, the smoke trail on dirt roads is a great addition, and the interactive elements on the road that you can hit like cans and cones are a nice touch to make you really feel like you're in a living world. I also really like the UI. It gives you the most important stuff up front, meaning the time limit is blue and outlined and large, and the actually intuitive design of the minimap doesn't actually show the track, but shows you placement on the track, which works because as a rally driver, you're more in tune with the navigator and on-screen cues and shouldn't be looking at a minimap for the next turn. The devs knew what's important, and it's the time limit. So while you have other things on screen, like how long it takes you to complete the track, your speed, and stage level, they're taking a back seat to the actual important thing. But that's more about the... So while I'm not into top-down racers, this does it so when you hit left on the directional pad or joystick, you always go left. You get what I'm saying? The controls are what you expect them to be. And while the game is very fast and you have a lot of turns, the game takes control of a lot of it without you feeling like you have no control. Meaning the cars aren't squirrely. Even the Celica, which is probably the best car but also the most loose, is easy to control. So like if you're going straight, you don't constantly have to correct yourself. There's also no shifting. The game is essentially giving you automatic cars. The game also handles the cornering by itself, but it's hard to explain it, but you have to get into a turn to do a successful slide. But when you do it in rapid successions, it feels really good when you pull it off. The game also does a great job of making each environment feel different. A snow track is going to feel different from a dirt track, and a dirt track is going to feel different than a road track. There's different obstacles on each track and environmental interactions, like hills that you get airborne on. So while it probably takes about 15 minutes to beat the game, you have a lot of stuff in that 15 minutes. But don't forget, this was an arcade game, so the difficulty spike on stage 3 starts to get insane. So 15 minutes is probably like 60 to 120 minutes depending on how good you are at each stage and the car you choose. As I said earlier, you only have 3 cars, and while they all look different, they all kind of act the same except for speed. And that's the Celica. Essentially, if you want to beat the game, you'll need to use the Celica, meaning all the other choices are kind of not good choices. Sorry, Subi fans, but as a Subaru owner myself, you understand. And don't think you're going to upgrade these cars in any way. Even the home console version has no upgrade path. The car you get is the car you're staying with. This game is pretty shallow in terms of mechanics, which isn't bad. I mean, it's an arcade port. Arcade games are very different than home console games. But you don't have a story, you don't have any rivals except the timer, and when you beat the game, which I don't have a shot of because stage 3, you just have a very limited animation of you and your navigator on top of the car celebrating. The game is all about the top score, nothing more, nothing less. However, while the game is hard, it's not a dick about it. If you fail a stage, it'll let you start that stage you failed instead of going back to the beginning of the game. At least this version of the game does. However, you can't restart a level even if you know you're going to fail. If you leave voluntarily, you have to start the game all over again. A trick is to intentionally fail the checkpoint so you don't have to go the entirety of the track, because while you still lose, you're not going back to the main menu. But I'd recommend just doing the track over and over again so you know every turn, jump, shortcut, and obstacle to place and get to the next stage. So this game requires some skill to play. Yes, there are memory moments like the obstacles, and once you learn the track, it gets a lot easier because you can anticipate the turns along with using those shortcuts, but knowing when to slow down, knowing how to turn and corner is a big thing in this game. Yes, you can pick up and play, but it's one of those games where it's easy to play, hard to master, and I think that is what makes it so fun and rewarding when you pull off cool moves. They are okay. There's nothing special, but they're also not offensive. The music is probably the worst part, but also it's not grating to your ears. The same could be said about the sound effects. They complement the gameplay. If they were any worse, it would throw off the entire game. Could they be better? Yeah, but don't forget, this was designed to be in a room with at least a dozen other arcade cabinets, all competing for your quarters and knowing you're not really going to hear the game, so I kind of give it a pass for that. It's a fun time attack game that's challenging but fair. The graphics are beautiful. It's isometric done right. If you fail a level, you don't have to start over again, which is so nice compared to the next game we're about to play. When you pass a stage, you do it because of skill and it feels really good. The car selection is S tier. I mean, let's face it, you can't beat these JDM legends. The courses are very hard as you move up in stages, to the point that any skill is taking backseat to just memorizing the track, and that's how you win. While you have a great selection of legendary cars, the game essentially forces you to pick only the Celica. I wish the audio was a little better to be on par with the graphics and gameplay. And I also wish you could upgrade the cars before or after each race. I was pretty pleasantly surprised with this one. I've had this collection in my library for some time and never tried it because it was a top-down isometric racer, so obviously this was automatically bad. But I'm glad I tried it out. I've always wanted to because of those graphics, and I'm actually glad I did, and when I learned about how expensive this game is, I'm glad it's out to the public to get in a legal way now. I do wish we had more mechanics in terms of upgradability at the very least, But again, it's an arcade racer. It is what it is, but I definitely recommend picking this up. These collections have a tendency to be delisted, and unless you want to go the emulation route, this is probably the definitive way to only play this game legally. While the replayability is non-existent unless you want to better your score, it does come with a bunch of other games, so the bang for the buck is there. Definitely check this one out. So to everyone's surprise, this is going to be your new number one. I know. Moto Roader is at the bottom of the list, so let's move on to the next game. So, Capcom is a company you've heard of, I'm pretty sure. And I'm pretty sure you know about the one racing game that everyone talks about. And this isn't the one we're going to talk about. Instead, we're talking about an even more obscure title that I never knew about until the Capcom Arcade Stadium 2 collection on Steam. Rally 2011 LED Storm, whatever it is, which is a hell of a name, was released in 1989. LED is an cool acronym meaning Laser Enhanced Destruction. It's a vertical scrolling racing game played through a top-down perspective with only left, right jump, and apparently transforming controls, which you'll see in this video I never figured out or knew that you could turn into a motorcycle. Apparently they gave this game a story. It's opening day of World Race 24, which is the most dangerous rally in the world. So as the title says, we have another rally racer. Awesome. Daredevils are coming for the rally to get the reward of $1 million, which is hilarious because $1 million now gets you a split one-level ranch-style home, but definitely without 2 bathrooms. You play as Fred, because of course you do, and your rival is Snake, so I'm glad there is a Metal Gear crossover here before Metal Gear ever came out, but let's talk about the... So, for the age of this game, it doesn't look that bad. It plays fine. The sprites are nice looking and the scaling is a nice gimmick. It seemed at one point these cars were licensed, but not in this version because of probably the same reason as Neo Drift. The game is pretty reminiscent of a vertical shooter, and that makes sense. I mean, Capcom have done stuff like this in the past, and it was probably easy to just skin and change a few mechanics for this title. Other than that, there's not much to say. There are cutscenes and they do look pretty good. I mean, this is a pretty high level poster child of what an arcade game should look like in the late 80s, early 90s. Like you could see this game being played in the background of some 80s sci-fi future movie, right? That said, the UI is all over the place and it tries to do the same thing as Neo Drift with the straight line map, but it's also cluttered with non-essentials like your speed, a score counter, and your energy, which is a lot like Moto Roader, but way better in terms of how it is utilized. There's graphical elements on the left and right side of the screen, which I have no idea what they do, and a counter, and I have no idea what this actually is, but it doesn't seem to do anything, or at the very least doesn't matter. Everything is just kind of randomly placed on screen, which, whatever, it's fine. This is an arcade game. It wasn't meant to be a home port, and I feel a lot of this is just Chrome to get into the vibes of the game. But again, that said, this looks way better than an NES game and even better than most Super NES games, at least at the time, and it still kind of holds up today. I mean, this could be a pretty interesting mobile game, but how does the... Stand up? Well, it's pretty standard actually. It's more of a time attack racer where you need to get energy because it constantly depletes throughout the level. You have to avoid obstacles and enemies because everything and anything is just depleting your energy. It's not too difficult, but it does succumb to the arcade quarter muncher mechanics where in later levels you have so many obstacles on screen. Unless you memorize each stage, you're never going to beat the game in one sitting. That said, the controls are pretty simple and intuitive. You have some power-ups like a shield and speed boost, but man, that speed boost will get you in trouble with later levels. I will say it was interesting that depending on how good you do, your car will talk shit about you if you just make it across the finish line. I bet the whole voice synthesizer was a pretty cool gimmick back in the day. Honestly, there's not much skill to this game other than memorizing the track, the obstacle placements, and power-ups. Yes, the faster you are and the better hand-eye coordination you have will help you win the game, but like I said, it's a quarter muncher. It's designed to be hard and want you to play over and over again to learn the track, and that's pretty much it. The music is your standard arcade cabinet music. It's there. It's a bit scratchy, but not offensive in any way. The voice synthesizer is the main attraction here. Though playing it in 2025, it's a bit comical and would never be a bullet point in any promo chart, but hey, the game is fucking 36 years old. Give it a break, man. The sound effects with the actual bleeps and bloops are pretty much top-notch arcade game sound effects for this time, and again, would be perfect for any movie or TV show that needs to put an arcade in the background or add sound effects for a game some kid is playing. They're so generic but also so iconic, it's kind of perfect. So let's talk about the... This game is easy to pick up and play. It still looks great for what it is, the sounds are fine, it's sort of addicting in terms of gameplay, and if it's a game over, you don't start from the beginning, which is always nice. At least in this version. You really don't do much other than go forward and avoid obstacles. There's not much depth to this game. Some levels get too cluttered, like it's a quarter muncher. Of course it is, but it gets annoying. The levels are uninspired. The voiceovers can get pretty annoying after a while, and overall it's just kind of a mid-tier game. So this is a weird game. It's what I technically would call a racing game, but we're at the threshold of what I would consider a racing game, which should be interesting the more we get into this series. I mean, a game like Twisted Metal isn't a racing game, right? But there are some car combat games where you have to win a circuit or against other players. But anyway, Rally 2011, it's fine. It's a great title to have in this Capcom collection, but it's something I would say you don't need to seek out other than seeing a piece of history from Capcom. But where does this go on the chart? Well, we already know it's better than Moto Roader, obviously. Obviously. I mean, I actually didn't mind playing this game. So is it better than Neo Drift Out New Technology? The answer is, of course, no. So, we have our new number 2 and our new number 3. Now, let's move on to our last game of the night, which might change the scale? Who knows? It probably will. Victory Run by my friends and yours at Hudson Soft is a game released on the TurboGrafx 16 in 1989 in the US, but also 1987 in Japan, so it's kind of an older game. That's hard to find now. Not impossible, but they didn't make it easy. It's on the Wii Virtual Console if you still have a running Wii, and you purchased this title before the store and servers went down. It's also on the PlayStation Network, and if you own the TurboGrafx 16 Mini, it's on there too. I am playing this on original hardware, so it might look a little funky. I'm using an HDMI adapter that upscales the game to, I believe, 720p, and I'm playing this on a 4K TV, and I understand it doesn't look as crisp as it should, but some people do like the style. I don't, but some people do. So when I talk about the graphics, I'm talking about the actual game and not this horrible translation this upscaler and my TV are doing right now. But anyway, the game is based on the Paris-Dakar Rally and is said to be the first game to do so. So it doesn't have your normal circuits, and it's more of a time attack rally racer, much like Neo Drift Out New Technology. These games have a lot of things similar to each other, except the... So I was very interested in this game because this looks like a midpoint between NES and Super NES. If you look at a game like Rad Racer and most racers on the SNES, you can see this fits right in the middle of that. And knowing this came out in 1987, it actually looks pretty good for its time. But you can see they were trying different techniques where it didn't quite work. So the scaling of cars and obstacles. Nintendo had the FX chip and Sega had the super scaling thing in the arcades. This tries to emulate that, but as the other cars get closer, you notice how chunky that scaling is and how off it seems to be. Like, look at that. The car is clearly way too big next to mine. I know I'm driving a Porsche and they tend to be on the smaller size, but still, the car also doesn't turn enough. Like, Hudson didn't get enough keys of animation when turning, so the car seems to be disconnected from the road at times as it turns. The way they try to emulate elevation also struggles a bit. I mean, it works, but you can see the game engine struggling when trying to put all this stuff on the screen. That said, a lot of games at this time didn't have this many unique elements to it. Like, there's 3 or 4 different vehicles on the road, and they're all detailed and vary in size. I also love the day and night cycle of this game. It can look very beautiful at times, and overall, it works. The colors pop, the sprites are chunky, so it's all very 16-bit. Like, when you think of 16-bit racing games, this is definitely something you would think of. However though, when it becomes night, it gets a little too dark. Like, in a lot of racers, the lines on the road are still bright, or they have lamps on the side of the road that illuminate the road so you can see where you're going. It almost seems like you have no headlights because it's just dark. And when you get to the dirt levels, it becomes a real pain in the ass. I also wish the HUD was on the bottom of the screen instead of the top. So let me explain some of the game mechanics. It doesn't have an automatic transmission as a choice, it's fully manual, so you have to make sure you shift at the right moments to not screw up your engine and actually get to speed. You can see the RPMs on the top left, and when it goes in the red or yellow, you should be shifting. So early on in the game, you're constantly looking up at the gauge to know when to shift. The timer, the map, and component degradation all live on that top screen. The problem is your car really isn't in the middle of the screen. It's all the way at the bottom, so you're looking at polar opposites for information. I think if they put the HUD on the bottom, it would be a lot easier to look between the two areas, but whatever. It is what it is. But this gets me to the... So the game does a lot of things. It looks and feels like an arcade racer, but it's also a rally racer with a bit of sim and management built into it. I like that you Oregon Trail style have to get provisions for your car that will last throughout the entire race. The car will wear over time, especially if you don't shift correctly, or you crash a lot, or you wear out your tires. And after every race, you can either repair fully or somewhat to those components, and it does affect your car. I actually really like that. It's a fun component to a game that probably really didn't need it when this came out. But it does enhance the gameplay. However, you can't actually save the game. There are checkpoints, but they do nothing. If you miss that next stage time limit, you start back at the beginning, which is insane. You either play this game in one sitting or you never beat the game. That said, I've seen people beat this game in about 20 minutes, so I hope you got your money's worth out of it, because there's not much else to do in this game. But the gameplay is pretty fun, and like I said, at first glance, it portrays itself as an arcade racer, but it's very simmy in some ways. Like, this is totally a game you have to press the brake if you want to beat the level. You can't just go full force on the throttle, which is also a pain because it's not like you have analog buttons. You either go or you don't go. I think the game handles difficulty by time of day and you have no choice in that difficulty. Like the later stages in the dirt tracks are almost a test in patience, where you have to repeat those levels over and over again to remember the turns and obstacles because they're so hard to see and the road gets so tight, it's almost like it's trying to make you fail. The other drivers on the road almost seem like NPC characters. Like, unless you know what a Dakar rally is, you would just think these are other people on the road, not rivals. But the only competition in this game is the timer. So what about the... Growing up as a kid, a lot of these games didn't really require skill as much as you need to memorize a level, know where the turns are, where the obstacles are, but this game does require some skill. Like I said, you need to know when to shift, you need to know when to brake, you need to think about how aggressive you are when driving so you know what parts to purchase. This game looks like an arcade racer, but it's got some pretty unique mechanics to it. And if the controller didn't literally have an NES layout, I bet they would have done a lot more in terms of mechanics. The music is pretty awesome actually. I love the soundtrack. It's fast, it's racy, it's 16-bit goodness. If you're into chiptunes, you would love the soundtrack. The sound effects are also pretty well done. Like, I know early on you're going to be looking at the revs to know when to shift, but the game does a good enough job that you can listen to the car's engine and know when to shift. Overall, out of all the games we've played today, this probably has the best sound to it. So let's get to the... It's pretty easy to get into. The parts buying and degrading mechanics are pretty cool. The day and night cycles and the difficulties between those help mix up the game. It also looks pretty good for what it is, and sounds really good for when it came out. The racing is challenging, but pretty fair. The checkpoint system pretty much kills this game for me though. I do wish there were slightly different routes so you could experiment, and I wish you could pick different vehicles. Clearly they have sprites for them, why not let me pick another one? I wish the opponents were a little more opponent-like, a little bit more aggressive or character to them, and it would have been great if there was 2-player support. Victory Run is kind of a forgettable game unless you played it growing up. There are games before it and after it that have done what it does much better, but it is a competent game and it holds its own. It has its own unique feel to it, its own vibe, especially from the last game we played on this console. If it only had a real checkpoint system and didn't act like an arcade game in terms of progression, this would have been a pretty perfect game. So where does this fall on the chart? This is a tough one. Obviously, it's better than Moto Roader, obviously. It's better than Rally 2011, but is it better than Neo Drift Out New Technology? That's a tough one. Remember, I said I hate top-down racers, but this one did it so right. The developers also knew their limitations in technology when making this game and ultimately made a pretty smooth title. But Hudson Soft was like, fuck it, we're doing it for Victory Run. And while the repair mechanic is awesome, it ultimately is pretty shallow. It's not like you're making the car better, faster, stronger, but I think the reason that Victory Run will ultimately be number 2 is because of the checkpoint, or lack of checkpoints. Neo Drift lets you keep your progression, Victory Run doesn't. So congratulations to our new number 2 game on this first episode, Victory Run. I feel Neo Drift Out isn't going to stay number 1 for much longer, but I'm pretty surprised how much I like that game. And also Victory Run, I mean honestly, that's a pretty good game. But let me know what you think about this list so far. I plan on breaking these up by console and generation as well, because I think each console has their own weakness and strengths, so while this will ultimately be one list, I will have a secondary category for systems. I mean, let's face it, a racer from the NES probably never going to be able to compete with a game that came out in the last 5 years. Or maybe it will, who knows? This is only the first episode, so let me know what you think. Did I get the list right? What other obscure games should I try? I know there are a lot out there and I'd love to discover them and see how they rank. But until next time, keep driving, keep playing.